Entering an accounts payable vendor invoice is similar to entering a cash payment in CenterPoint. The biggest difference is instead of decreasing cash, you are either increasing an accounts payable liability account, or if this is a credit card charge, you're increasing a credit card liability account. Some of the differences that makes in the income statements and cash flows that you're working with, a cash transaction will show up on an accrual income statement and a cash income statement. Cash income statement is managed by a user-defined report in CenterPoint that you use for filing taxes, such as your Schedule F or your Schedule C. And it's determining what is cash to display on a cash income statement. And additionally, it's on a cash flow. If you enter an accounts payable vendor invoice, it's only going to be on an accrual income statement. It's not part of filing taxes yet. It's not part of cash. A credit card vendor invoice will be on an accrual income statement and a cash income statement because the ruling is a credit card charge is treated as an expense for tax reporting purposes. Therefore, it's on both the accrual income statement and the cash income statement. When you pay the account payable vendor invoice and it becomes an account payable payment, then you will see in that period it on a cash income statement and on the cash flow. Whereas a credit card payment shows up at the time that you charged the credit card, it was on the cash income statement, but it doesn't become part of cash activity until you pay the credit card. So for example, if you charged a credit card in December and you're on a calendar year and you paid it in January, for tax purposes, it's going to be in December and part of taxes in the December year. On the cash flow, though, you would not see it until January. If this were an account payable and you purchased it, put it on the account payable in December and paid it in January, you're not going to report it for taxes until January, and it isn't part of cash until January. So those are some differences that you'll see in the different transaction types. And now we're going to enter a vendor invoice AP by going up to Processes, Purchases, and Vendor Invoices. All of the different shortcuts and lookup options are the same as entering a cash payment. So we're going to select our company. In all of the different lookup fields, you can click the lookup magnifying glass to select a different option. And there's also right-click options to create new ones. In this case, for the company, you could set the company as default. And if we were going down to the vendor, we're going to select our vendor, Supplies Depot. And if we wanted to set different ways our lookup behaves for the vendor, you can go to Options. And there are different lookup options. And there's a video called Using Lookups that will help you in setting those different ways that you can set how you want lookups to behave. Once we select our vendor, it filled in our address information. If we wanted to create a new vendor because we haven't used this one before, you can do that from the lookup screen of clicking New here, or a new one-time use if we want it to be inactive automatically after saving this because we don't intend to use that vendor again. Or you can right-click and choose New and create a new vendor. At the bottom is our account payable account. And in the account payable, we can set that as a default under File, and then Preferences, Vendor Invoices, and select Default Accounts. And we're going to click the Database tab, and we can select some default accounts that we want to use when we're doing vendor invoices, and we filled in accounts payable. If by chance you have multiple account payable accounts that you want to use for your different vendors to categorize different vendors, you can set an account payable at the vendor level also. I'm going to edit this vendor by right-clicking, go to Edit. And if we click the Detail button on the vendor name type, we can set a default payment term for this particular vendor and set an account payable account. So those are different ways that you can manage your account payable that gets selected here. The on hold, you can check if you're wanting to put in this payable transaction, but you don't want it to appear in pay invoices due yet, and so it does not get paid yet. Maybe there's an issue outstanding on this invoice that needs to get resolved before you want that paid. And if you put that on hold, if you want to take it off hold, then you would go up to processes, purchases, and place invoices on hold to select that vendor and take it off of hold. I'm going to take that off. On the right-hand side, if it is at no batch, that means that when you save this transaction, it's automatically going to post it. If you don't want it posted at this time, you want it part of a batch, you can select a batch or create a new batch in this field. The vendor balance would display any outstanding balance for this particular vendor that I've indicated here. The reference number might be the invoice number of what you're entering for this vendor. And then the date. We can change the date if we need to. And when we selected our vendor, it filled in our terms that we had assigned on that particular vendor, and as well calculated the date due and the discount date based on the details assigned in this particular payment term. We can start with an amount or leave it blank. So if we put in an amount, that amount is going to default to the first line in our transaction grid. The bottom of the screen is going to define the details of what we're purchasing of the goods and services. And so we're going to start with the account and select what account that represents what we're purchasing at this time. So we're purchasing some office supplies. We're going to pick our office supplies account. And again, I just typed in a couple of characters, and that was my lookup option of how I want that to behave. Or I could click in there and do my lookup of my accounts. And when I'm in my accounts, I can add other different categories, or with add remove column, I could add account category or add anything here that would help me determine which account that I want. You'll notice that on my invoice reference number, it filled in the same number that I filled in up at the top. That's because I have an option in my options at the bottom to copy reference number to invoice reference number. So if you want this number that you're indicating for the transaction to be copied to each one of my different subdivisions in my transaction, that will do that. If you don't want that, then you wouldn't want to check that option. And then I'm going to go to my next field. The fields that you see on your grid are customizable also. I can right-click on the blue row, select Add Remove Columns, and add any details I want here. If there's another column I want to add, like perhaps I want an inventory location or some field, I can add that and then position it where I want on my grid. If you're using inventory items and purchasing, doing accounts payable for inventory items, we're going to address that in a separate video of entering an invoice with inventory items. But in this one, we're just going to be doing a basic expense account payable. So as you enter your details in, you can fill in any other details that might apply to this particular expense. You'll notice that I have a distribution assigned. It's orange, indicating that there's a distribution assigned to this account, and I have an amount to it. That is determining what kind of profit center distribution I want applied when I use this particular expense account, and that alleviates you having to divide out this particular expense if I need this assigned to multiple profit centers by some sort of formula. If this were just one transaction that goes to one account, I can leave that amount, but if I want this divided to a couple of different things that I'm purchasing, then I can change my amount on the first line and put any details that apply to this particular expense, like maybe we're going to say this is for paper. And then we can go to the next line and select what the next account is that we want to do. So maybe we need a repair here, and we're going to do a building repair. And it did not fill in my invoice number because I had that unchecked now, but it would have if I had left that checked. And if a quantity applies, you can put in a quantity, and again, then any details. If there's details that don't display on the front screen, but you want to add that kind of detail, you can click the detail button. That will display all the details that are available for this particular template that I'm using. Once you have all of the details entered that you want, your amount will be agreeing with the top amount. You'll notice that I have a terms discount at the bottom. That's because my terms of net 30 indicated if I pay this before my discount date, I will get an available terms discount of $173, and I can overwrite that and put in a different amount if I wanted to. Then down at the bottom of the screen, we have some different buttons. So you can scan a document if you want to scan a document and attach that to this transaction. Or if I have a document already on my computer and I want to browse to it, I can click the paper-click and browse to it. My memo lines are down here to add extra information. That memo line can be used a different way also. If I click Options, there is a Show Other Charges field. And if you are wanting to track the amount of freight or sales tax on your different accounts payable entries, this is an easy way to do it. It will, by choosing to display freight and sales tax, that will give me a way to just put those amounts in here. It'll always be there. And it is going to be assigned to the accounts that I set in my default accounts under Preferences. When we went to File, Preferences, Vendor Invoices, and Default Accounts to set accounts payable, there was also the field for freight. I had freight filled in with freight expense, but I did not have sales tax filled in. So that's why this one is grayed out. But if you fill that in with your sales tax expense, you could put both of those here in order to track that information. And if you put some information in there, like let's say the freight, I had this shipped to me and the freight was $10, then I can also click the detail and put any details in here too that I might want to track, just like I can on my normal expense in the entry. And then I have my adjust amount. If this amount, like right now, it doesn't come up with the right amount because I put in some freight, and it totaled up to be $355 where I had started with $345, I can click Adjust Amount, and that adjusts my amount up at the top of the screen. Then we have our buttons down at the bottom to save this transaction, and at this point there's no batch, so it would save and post at the same time. Clear would let us start all over. Recall is used if you select the vendor and you want to click Recall to recall the last transaction that you did with that vendor. And every time you click recall, it'll go back one more. Reoccurring is if I have a reoccurring transaction. If I had a reoccurring, this little reoccurring button would be yellow, and that just means that it has a transaction saved to this particular vendor in this entry type screen that would automatically load that entry for me, because that's something I typically always do with that vendor. And then there are some different options here to review the last 10 transactions. If I'm using custom field comments to fill in that. Your recall can be toggled between recall by company or recall by company bank. So in this case, company and payable combination. And this is a show memo field that toggles between the freight and sales tax that I showed you, the copy reference number we talked about. And then there are some set tab stops where if you don't want to stop at all the different tabs through the entry, that's just a little shortcut to undo some of those or add some if you need to. And then a refresh screen. So those are all the different options on entering your vendor invoice. And when this posts, it's going to increase my liability account here of accounts payable and increase my expense accounts. And we'll go ahead and do that. And if it is a credit card charge, it would get done the same way, but I'll show you just quickly. If we wanted to do a credit card charge to a gas station, and we chose our credit card, when it goes to pay invoices due, the only difference will be in pay invoices due, it's going to show up under our credit card, MasterCard. But when we do reports, we're still going to be able to do it under the vendor that we selected, which in this case was gas station. And then the difference is, again, that we talked about on how it shows up on the cash income statement. So those are some different ways to do your vendor invoice and how it reacts to your different reports.